You sit here now, asking yourself why your heart hurts so deeply, while others seem untouched. Before you even speak, you already feel the energy in the room. You carry emotions too strongly, too personally. And when people call you kind, it feels both beautiful and painful at the same time. You have been told again and again that your empathy is a special gift. Yet most days it feels more like a quiet burden, a slow sacrifice of your spirit for the emotions of other people. But what if the truth is different? What if your empathy is not simply a blessing from above, but also a scar created by your past? The empath, as modern people like to describe it, is not some magical soul floating above ordinary humanity. No. The empath is often a survivor, someone shaped by emotional fire. And the deepest truth of all is this: the empath is usually a child who was never allowed to think of themselves first, never allowed to create boundaries, have needs, or even discover a real identity of their own. Let us walk slowly into the hidden world inside your mind and spirit, and you may begin to understand. When you were very young, you learned something dangerous very early. You learned that your safety depended on managing the emotions of other people. Maybe your mother cried often, and her sadness filled the home like endless rain. Or maybe your father's anger moved through the house like thunder, and you learned to study every shift in his mood before he even spoke a word. Whatever the reason, your nervous system became trained to notice danger everywhere. You became deeply aware of every emotional change around you. This was not pure compassion. This was survival. The empath is not created through enlightenment alone. The empath is often created through emotional deprivation, and instead of asking loudly for love, attention, affection, or comfort, which may have felt unsafe or selfish, the child learned another strategy. They learned invisibility. They learned that survival came through disappearing into the needs of others. Slowly, their boundaries melted away. They became whatever everyone else required because the alternative felt terrifying. You think maybe you simply love too much. But the deeper reality is that nobody showed you a kind of love that included you too. That is why I say the empath is often a child who was never allowed to be selfish. Healthy selfishness is not evil. It is not cruelty. It is the powerful statement that says, I exist. I matter too. I am not only a mirror reflecting everyone else's emotions and expectations. In a world obsessed with being useful, productive, agreeable, and good, the empath often becomes trapped in a quiet prison while appearing saintly on the outside. They struggle to say no. They struggle to walk away. They feel other people's emotions because years ago their safety depended on reading those emotions correctly. What many people call empathy is sometimes hyper-awareness shaped by fear. What people call intuition is often a survival method learned through pain and instability. Imagine now a dream hidden inside the unconscious. A child walks alone through a forest filled with watching eyes. Every tree stares, every bush whispers softly. The child walks barefoot, trying not to make noise because noise once brought punishment. Their heart beats loudly, but their mouth stays silent. In their hands they carry a lantern, but the light is not for themselves. It is for everyone else. They guide others, they comfort others, they warm others. But nobody guides them, nobody protects them. That child is your inner archetype. That forest is your early emotional world. That silence is your wound. In analytical psychology, every repeated emotional pattern becomes a myth your soul keeps repeating. The empath's myth is often the myth of sacrifice, the wounded caretaker, the emotional servant. But sacrifice without rebirth is not sacred. It becomes slow destruction. Now imagine that same child in the dream suddenly stopping. They sit down quietly. They place the lantern on the ground and allow the light to go out. For the first time, they are unavailable. The eyes around them stare in confusion. The whispers grow louder. Why are you not helping? Why are you not carrying our pain anymore? But the child remains still, and for the first time in their life, they listen only to their own heartbeat. This is where the true self begins to awaken. The self, the center of wholeness inside the psyche, is not born from endlessly absorbing other people's emotions. It is born through differentiation, through learning where you end and others begin. To become whole, you must eventually stop carrying everything that belongs to everyone else. You must become selfish in a sacred way. Not selfish through cruelty or ego, but selfish through self-recognition, through saying, I deserve to live fully too. You believe your strength comes from feeling the emotions of everyone around you. But real strength is being able to feel your own emotions honestly, without apologizing for them. Now we go deeper into the unconscious, where the shadow waits. The shadow contains every part of yourself you were forced to reject in order to survive. For the empath, this often includes anger, desire, selfishness, confidence, pride, and personal needs. These were the traits you were taught would make you difficult or bad. Yet without these parts, you can never become complete. An empath without connection to their shadow becomes trapped in emotional servitude. A person addicted to sacrifice. A soul confusing suffering with spiritual purpose. Healing begins when you stop trying to feel more and instead begin feeling differently. It begins when you stop fearing your own anger, when you stop swallowing your needs, when you stop apologizing for refusing to carry another person's chaos. Boundaries are not acts of war. They are sacred acts of self-respect. This is why so many empaths enter healing professions. They become counselors, nurses, therapists, spiritual teachers, coaches, and guides. But if they never heal their original wound, the wound of forbidden selfishness, they slowly become prisoners of their own kindness. They give because giving makes them feel valuable. They rescue others because rescuing distracts them from rescuing themselves. Their kindness becomes a transaction formed long ago in childhood. If I heal you, maybe I will finally be safe. But safety is not the final purpose of healing. Wholeness is. To become whole, you must reclaim the parts of yourself that once frightened people. The demanding child, the emotional child, the angry child, the child who wanted attention, comfort, and love. That child was never wrong. That child was only silenced. You were never created to absorb the pain of the world like a sponge. You were created to live as a complete soul. The dream appears once again, but this time the child no longer carries a lantern. Now they carry a mirror. And when people look into it, they no longer see someone ready to rescue them. They see a boundary, a choice, a reflection that says no. The empath transforms from healer into revealer, and many people will dislike this version of you. They will say you have changed. They will say you are cold, distant, selfish, or hard to reach. But often this is the first real sign that healing has finally begun. The final destination of the empath is not sainthood, it is sovereignty. You are not here only to absorb the suffering of the world. You are here to transform your relationship with it. And that transformation requires understanding where you begin and where others end. Even Christ stepped away into the garden alone and asked for the burden to be lifted. Even the Buddha left the palace in silence, searching for truth. Even the divine path includes separation and individuation. Why should your path be different? You cannot truly help the world if you are emotionally enslaved by it. You cannot become a strong vessel if you are constantly leaking your energy into everyone around you. And you cannot love honestly until you are willing to disappoint people with your truth. Now perhaps you understand. The empath is not broken, but they are not fully whole yet either. They stand somewhere between the wound and wisdom, between survival and freedom. And the bridge between those two places is conscious selfishness. That is where healing truly begins. Now it is time to return to yourself, not as a servant, not as a martyr, not as a hero carrying everyone else's burdens, but simply as yourself. So many people ask the same painful questions. Why do I attract wounded people? Why do my relationships leave me emotionally exhausted? Why do I always feel responsible for fixing everyone else while nobody cares for me in return? And the answer is painful, because what you call love is often a repetition of unresolved pain. You are not only seeking connection, you are seeking redemption. Deep inside, you are trying to rewrite the original emotional wound. The moment you learned your needs were inconvenient, your emotions were excessive, your joy too loud, your sadness too uncomfortable for others to hold. You believe that if you love someone deeply enough, heal them enough, save them enough, then maybe one day someone will finally love you back completely. Not because of what you give, but because of who you are. But this belief is often an illusion. And illusions live deep in the unconscious, repeating themselves through every friendship, every relationship, every emotional crisis. When we explore dreams and symbols, empaths often describe similar images. A house that feels empty and impossible to leave, a crying child hidden in a locked room, a mirror without any reflection staring back. These are not random symbols. They reveal a fragmented inner world. The empty house represents the abandoned self created during childhood. The crying child represents the inner pain forced into silence. The empty mirror represents identity lost beneath the expectations of others. You have lived inside these emotional patterns for years, even while awake. You built emotional homes inside other people while neglecting your own spirit. You memorized everybody else's pain while forgetting the shape of your own soul. And now you feel exhausted. Not because you are weak, but because some part of you is finally ready to stop performing endless compassion and begin practicing wholeness instead. Hear this clearly. It is not noble to bleed endlessly for people who would never protect you in return. It is not spiritual to erase yourself in the name of love. It is not divine to carry responsibilities that never belong to you. That is not compassion. That is self-abandonment wearing sacred clothing. If the child inside you was never allowed to be selfish, then your healing as an adult is learning how to become whole without shame. To reclaim the selfishness once condemned by others, because that selfishness was never about ego or cruelty. It was your soul crying out, saying, I am here. I matter too. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to feel anger. You are allowed to admit when you are not okay. You are allowed to choose yourself even while others struggle around you. And yes, you are allowed to love yourself without guilt. We must never confuse shadow work with self-denial. True healing does not ask you to destroy yourself in order to prove your goodness. Real healing asks you to finally become honest about your humanity. The shadow is not your enemy. The shadow contains your buried life force. Inside it lives your voice, your power, your instincts, your desires, and your right to exist fully. The more you reject these parts, the more exhausted and emotionally trapped you become. But the moment you stop fearing your own needs, something changes inside you.
Your compassion becomes real instead of desperate. Your kindness becomes free instead of transactional. Your love becomes honest instead of sacrificial. And perhaps for the first time in your life, you stop asking how to save everyone else and finally begin asking a new question. What would happen if I saved myself too? The purpose of shadow integration is not to destroy the ego, but to bring light to the hidden parts of yourself that were buried under shame for years. The empath's shadow is often filled with guilt. Guilt for saying no, guilt for taking a break.
Guilt for having needs. Guilt for leaving situations that drained you. But that guilt is only a shadow from the past. It is the echo of an old agreement you made with the world. If you are good, then you will finally be loved. But what is goodness if it costs you your identity? What is love if it demands your disappearance? Hear this clearly now. Empathy without boundaries is not healing. It is repetition. It is the soul repeating its own captivity while calling it kindness. But you are not here to repeat old suffering. You are here to wake up. When the true self starts rising, it does not scream for attention. It speaks quietly, and its first words often sound frightening to the wounded part inside you. I do not want to keep saving everyone anymore. I no longer care about their approval. I need distance. I deserve happiness too. These are not the words of arrogance. They are the first breaths of a soul finally learning how to belong to itself again. For too long, you confused kindness with sacrifice. But real kindness also includes you. You confused empathy with emotional absorption. But true empathy has limits. It has a sacred line that says, "This is my energy and that is yours." You are not failing because you feel exhausted. You are awakening because your old patterns can no longer survive. The false version of you must fade so the real self can finally live. Every transformation in mythology begins with a descent into darkness. In the story of Inanna, she travels into the underworld where every symbol of her identity is removed. Her beauty, her titles, her power, everything is stripped away until she stands exposed before Ereshkigal, the dark goddess of the unconscious. There she experiences death before she is reborn complete and fearless. In the same way, you must meet the dark feminine within yourself, the part carrying your anger, your desires, your pain, and the selfishness you buried long ago. You must allow the false good person to die, the helper, the fixer, the one who smiles while silently hurting inside. Only then can the authentic self rise, the self who feels with people instead of carrying them, the self who can support others without losing identity, the self who can honestly say, "I love you, but I will no longer hold your suffering for you." The empath is often just the child who was never allowed to think about themselves, and that child is still waiting inside you for permission. Permission to stop performing, permission to speak loudly, permission to take space in this world, permission to say no without explaining every detail, permission to rest without guilt, permission to receive love without fear. Imagine what life would feel like if you stopped being everyone's emotional sponge. Imagine no longer living as the caretaker for every wounded person around you. Imagine no longer existing as the background sound in someone else's story. At first, the ego resists this change. It whispers fear into your mind. You will end up alone. People will leave. You will become selfish just like the people who hurt you. But that voice is not wisdom. It is unresolved pain. The people who made you feel unsafe whenever you had needs were not conscious of the damage they caused. But you are becoming conscious now, and consciousness changes everything because awareness creates choice, and choice creates freedom. Now the decision belongs to you. Will you continue living inside the story of martyrdom, Or will you begin writing a new story? In this new story, you do not heal people in order to earn love. You love yourself first, and from that fullness you offer your truth instead of your servitude. You stop shrinking yourself to make others comfortable. You expand into the size of your real soul. You are no longer the candle burning itself down for others. You become the sun, complete and radiant. And those who cannot handle your light must search for their own source of warmth. You are not here to regulate the emotions of every wounded person you meet. You are not here to become the therapist for every relationship. You are not here to absorb chaos for everyone around you. You are here to become yourself. And that, dear empath, is the holiest work of all. There is something deeply sacred about the moment you stop apologizing for your existence. It is not dramatic or aggressive. It feels quiet, almost like hearing a locked door slowly open somewhere deep inside your bones. For too long you have stood on the shore of other people's needs while ignoring the ocean within yourself. But the tide is changing now. The empath is waking up, not into endless giving, but into self-reclamation. This breaking apart of the identity you once called kindness is not destruction. It is a return. It is the remembering of all the parts of yourself you abandoned just to be accepted. Can you feel it? That ache you have carried for years is not weakness. It is your hidden self calling to you from behind the smile you carefully created for the world. And if you are truly brave, you will stop focusing on fixing everyone else and begin the harder journey of finally seeing yourself clearly. You have hidden behind the wounds of others for long enough. Now it is time to recognize your own wounds. What happens when the empath looks into the mirror and realizes they are not only the healer, but also someone deeply in need of healing? That realization feels terrifying, but it is also the doorway to freedom. Many of you became experts at being the caretaker, the listener, the guide, the emotional support for everyone around you. Yet inside there is still a child sitting alone in darkness, with tired hands wrapped in invisible bandages. She spent years holding together the broken pieces of other people until her own spirit began to crack. Nobody ever asked her how she felt. She was only praised for how well she comforted everyone else. So she learned to survive by abandoning herself. But you do not need to continue living this role anymore. You are not here to become a saint. You are here to become whole. And sometimes becoming whole means disappointing the same people you once sacrificed everything to please. Can you hear that quiet movement inside yourself? That is your authenticity trying to breathe again. Deep inside your shadow, there is a locked chest you have protected your entire life. Inside it are the emotions you were taught were unacceptable: desire, anger, resentment, self-interest, pride. Every one of them was pushed away by your inner judge and labeled dangerous. But here is the truth. Until you welcome back the parts of yourself you rejected, you will continue living in fragments. You will remain a healer carrying an untreated wound, a giver secretly angry about always giving, a lover who never truly feels loved. You cannot rise above what you refuse to face. You must open that chest without shame. Your anger is not evil. It is sacred fire showing you where your boundaries should exist. Your selfishness is not a sin. It is the compass guiding you back toward your own needs. Even your pride is not corruption. It is the memory of a time when you understood your own worth. To become complete, you must allow these hidden parts into your inner temple, not so they control you, but so they can finally be acknowledged and understood. Until then, your empathy will constantly battle your exhaustion. Your light will weaken beneath silent resentment. Your compassion will always carry an invisible condition underneath it that whispers, "Please love me back." But love that must be earned through suffering is not love. It is emotional debt. And you were never meant to spend your life trapped in emotional debt. When I speak about individuation, I am not talking about becoming perfect. I am speaking about the sacred return to yourself. It is the process of gathering back every lost piece of your identity, even the pieces that appear selfish, inconvenient, or unattractive. Real spiritual maturity is not measured by how much pain you can carry for others. It is measured by how deeply you know your own limits, by how honestly you can say no, by how rarely you betray yourself for approval, by how peacefully you can sit alone in your own presence without disappearing into another person's crisis. The empath who refuses inner healing often becomes a magnet for emotionally unavailable people, narcissistic personalities, and wounded souls. Not because they deserve suffering, but because they are unconsciously repeating an old pattern from childhood. Deep inside, there is still a voice saying, "If I can finally fix someone, maybe I will finally become enough." But this is the trap. You cannot heal a person who benefits from your self-erasure. You cannot repair someone whose affection is conditional. You cannot rewrite your childhood by sacrificing yourself in the present moment. You must release these patterns, not with bitterness, but with awareness. Release the illusion that empathy requires self-sacrifice. Release the belief that love must involve suffering. Release the lie that your worth depends on how much pain you can carry for everyone else. The moment the empath chooses themselves, reality begins to change. You start attracting people who are emotionally whole instead of emotionally starving. Silence begins to feel peaceful instead of frightening. You start asking yourself what you need and finally giving it to yourself without guilt. This is not selfishness in the fearful way you were taught to imagine it. This is sacred selfhood. The child who was never allowed to think about themselves eventually becomes the adult who stands fully and unapologetically whole. And this transformation heals the world more deeply than endless self-sacrifice ever could. Because wholeness spreads outward. It inspires others to reconnect with their own integrity. It invites honesty. It breaks cycles of emotional manipulation. It replaces guilt with truth. Most importantly, it destroys the ancient belief that in order to be loved, you must disappear. You are not here to disappear, dear soul. You are here to exist fully, not to dominate others, but to radiate authenticity, to live in a way where your very presence teaches people what self-respect looks like. Not through preaching, not through rescuing, not through saving everyone around you, but simply through being real, through becoming someone who no longer rescues others from themselves, but instead invites them to meet you honestly, openly, and truthfully.